All right. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Good evening for me. I'm Stanley, and I'm mad as hell. I'm mad about almost everything that's happening to me and everyone else in my community right now, but rather than wallowing and letting it consume me, I like to channel that into things that are mostly inconsequential. And today, that's going to be about world building. And a very quick shout out to the John Boyce video I stole this screenshot from, which also has one of the greatest graphs ever made by anyone. But this is not about John Boyce. This is about world building. And this brings us to the question of what world building actually is. It's one of those you know it when you see it kind of things. You're developing a fictional world, an ecosystem, a culture, political factions, usually in service to a story or piece of media, but sometimes just for the sake of making a world. The next question, how do we do that? Well, let's go on Google and see what kind of resources we can find. Our first one here talks about describing your world, and maybe you should go so far as creating a map. Another one which guides you to this, which definitely gives me a lot of confidence in the quality of that guide. Yes, another one prompting you to create a map, another strongly encourages you to make a map, another one tells you to make a map, another one tells you to make a map, and I'm just going to stop there because the rest of them are just AI summaries of all of these articles trying to sell you map making software, and all of them are terrible. And as you might have guessed by now, we have a slight problem. There seems to be only one way to world build, and literally nobody on the planet has written about any other method ever. This is a problem faced by a lot of people getting into world building. Because world building is often seen as a tool or a means to an end and not an art, there's this real belief that there's only one way to do things. You must create a map. You must create a solar system for your single planet. You must create a constructed language. You must produce maps of tectonic plates and curving climates and speculative biology, and you must do all these things because whatever anyone else is doing that isn't world building. As you might imagine, for people getting into world building who see every single source parroting that same line, you start to believe that. I had a world I'd been working on for years, and it wasn't until recently that I was able to fully break out of that mold and, shocker, make the stuff that I actually wanted to make. I'd also been wrestling with something that I really disliked about how almost everyone approached world building. And I don't just mean the maps, this goes a little bit deeper. If you do have a world building project, you are often encouraged to do this. Create a giant wiki, a huge vault that has all the information on your world from timelines to town layouts to maps. And it tells you everything. Want to know about a town? Here's its full history. Want to know about a character's full motivations and exactly what's in their head? Here's their full DSM-5 diagnosis. Want to know who are the ontologically good and bad people in this world because that's not a concerning thing to have in a story ever? Here you go. And I'm not a fan of this, as you can probably tell. Beyond the maps, beyond the step-by-step guides, everything wants you to lay out all of your work in an objective manner with no space for interpretation, having it be fully public and categorized a bit like a fan wiki. This kingdom is evil because this page says it's evil. The protagonist is good because the story revolves around them and they have a page over here. World building, I feel, is entirely neglected as an art by this mindset. There's the other side to this as well. Those who see the wiki method and feel that there's no room for artistic grace in world building, that it is just an extension of a book or game, and it only serves the plot. It has no value beyond the plot. This paragraph is quite a common philosophy for a lot of fiction writers. Also, to underscore the fact that I'm someone who has quite strong opinions and maybe take what I say with a grain of salt in some cases, this paragraph made me think many different things about what everything this is trying to sell you, with an affiliate link right after it. So, what else can we do? I believed, and I still believe, that world building itself has great potential as a narrative tool that can create incredibly engaging experiences. How you can make the player feel like they themselves are a participant in trying to figure out how the world functions, make them feel like a mini historian in effect. I have that world that I mentioned before. I've developed it quite a bit. I've redeveloped and rewritten many parts of it, and I really wanted to bring something from it out into the public because I was going to go insane. The result was this game, the Shaman, the Outsider, and the Diet of Worms. You're presented with these in-universe materials, a PDF scan of an autobiography of an anthropologist visiting a remote village, and a wiki page explaining it, made 400 years after the book was published. This includes an edit history, user comments, and the like. There's no real goal or end state here. The game doesn't suddenly go, congratulations, you've accumulated enough knowledge. It's up to you as the player to decide when you've had enough. And I really liked it. Other people liked it. It won an award at NarraScope this year, which is probably half of why I'm here doing this talk. But the whole game was basically a trial run for a certain approach to world building that I believe more of us should try, especially game and game-adjacent makers. And if it didn't work, I'd just forget it happened and go live under a bridge or something. But it did work. Worked enough to win an award. And here's the approach that I took. I have a giant any-type vault, effectively a wiki, where everything I write is completely and objectively true. Everything in here is written with precise dates. I know if every person is alive or dead. I know exactly when and how empires rise and fall. It is the capital T truth of this world. And no one except me will ever see this. The only way that a player, as we'll call them, can ever know about this world is to engage with in-universe materials. If you want to find out about a historic event, your sources are in-universe historical textbooks, and you have to read them with the biases and prejudices of whoever wrote it. You have to consider what kinds of prejudices they'd have, why they'd have them, how to cross-reference that with other materials you've read. Are there contradictions? Which sources do you trust more? This is pretty simple as an idea, and I'm hardly the first person to do this. But I want to show you why this is such a powerful way of doing this, and how this effectively makes world building a means of narrative all in itself. First off, we now have a world where none of the materials we put out are objective. There's no way to truly know what the point-by-point series of events is. You will entirely rely on your own critical eye to glean which sources might have biases and why. And I'm not telling you explicitly which ones have biases. In short, I'm making you do all the work. And people think this is fun. With this method, we split our work into two spaces. I'm calling this the truth and the player space. The truth, as we mentioned before, is the objective, true series of events. Just in short, that wiki. And the player space is what people actually see. That's those in-universe materials, which can be textbooks, fictional novels, web pages, blog posts, songs, podcasts, photographs, paintings, literally anything. To demonstrate how nothing is objective, let's do a basic example. Here's a character in this world, and they die by drowning. So maybe we should start with a police report. Now, this is already implying a ton about this world already. Just from the existence of a police report, first we've established that the police exist. We've established that the police investigate deaths. We've established that police reports are public. Are they? Maybe we're letting the player, so say, access this document as a member of the police. But that's all something for a little bit later. Let's just focus on this. Let's say the police report is inconclusive. They aren't sure if the character died because of foul play or active murder. Perhaps someone related to this character strikes a book deal and makes a whole autobiography of it. Related to the police report, that might shine some new light that gets us closer to what happened. Let's throw a spanner in the works. Someone claims to be the killer. Now, obviously this looks ridiculous from our POV, but remember, this is what the player is seeing. Now, this news source contradicts quite a bit, but there might be parts in there that explains omissions from other materials. Can we trust it? Maybe there's a blog post from someone else claiming there was no murder, but maybe the evidence seems to contradict itself. Who we trust and why really depends on the content of these, the context they were made under, and possibly the other materials that are already in the player space. The important thing is that all of these sources contain aspects or refractions of the truth, but none are objective sources. They're colored by these characters' perceptions of events, their emotional states, and personal vendettas. We don't even need to get too detailed into who these characters are and their backgrounds, just we need to know that they have some kind of motive. This method creates a space where the player is naturally inclined to question everything. Obviously, in the case of a murder mystery, you're already kind of in that headspace to begin with. But you don't need to go to the extremes of trying to figure out how a character died. This could be literally anything. The exact motions of a specific battle. What cuisine is typical to eat on a remote island? What collar jacket a historical figure wore? Literally anything. And this is what I mean by putting gameplay on the player. All I've done is subtly imply to the player that, hey, there is an objective truth in these materials, you just need to dig and find it. It might be impossible to find. The key here is that I haven't said that this is solvable. I've just offered up a selection of materials and said they exist within a specific world and specific context. It's not necessarily a murder mystery, it's just world building. There's no plot or act structure or whatever, but there's still story to be found in there, and people will hunt for it. They'll create theories, they'll discuss with each other, try to map out events and cross-reference to see if people are lying, all because you're always going back from that absolute source. There's connected threads that they can pull on, even if you're putting in biases or lies that these characters would. Not only can you make your world more engaging for the player, you can also make creating it a more entertaining process for you. This method, mostly by accident, actually lets you as the author play into mistakes and amendments that you've made to your world without immediately needing to resort to rewrites or full retcons. And it lets your world evolve much more naturally, and similarly to how the actual world works. Let's do an example. Here we have a date for a historical battle, and we'd like to tell people about it. You then publish an in-universe book on the war this battle was part of. Everything's great, not much to think about here. But then, oops, some revisions have happened. For whatever reason, you've now realized it makes far more sense for this battle to happen on a slightly different date. But you've still got that original book out. People are reading it. They're taking all its information as fact. The knee-jerk reaction to this might be to go back and revise that published text out of character, so to speak. Just going, sorry guys, we made a mistake, some things changed behind the scenes, and now it's all a little bit different now, don't worry about it. Instead, let's make this part of the world. How can we rectify this? We could fix this with a new publication. What should it be? Well, the easiest answer to that is an updated edition of that original text. Why was this edition updated? Maybe new discoveries for everyone. They sincerely believe that this was the date, or the data said that. Maybe this date had a mythic or national significance, and no one thought to question it. Maybe there's controversy over this, and the publishers amending that speaks to their political leanings. Maybe it was a print error. Maybe we could play with how the print error is reported. Is this a big issue, or is it a small issue? How does the publisher react to this? Does their reaction make things better or worse? Is the publisher considered some kind of monolith of knowledge, or do the authors also take some flack? Maybe it's laymen who report on this. Maybe this new date is a conspiracy theory and nobody believes all of these outsider sources. Maybe in-universe the publisher is notoriously unreliable as a source, and obviously the publisher isn't going to tell you that in its own book. Look at how much we could do with this. This was a single date that we changed. And you might be looking at this and thinking, well, that's a lot of work. We have other things we want to focus on. So, do nothing. They'll never know that that's an incorrect date. Is it significant that they know? Maybe it's not. Think right now how many historical dates you have in your head that might be in 100 years, in 50 years, maybe even 10. Some archaeological evidence comes about and it turns out it's on a completely different date or in a completely different location. Your life is mostly unaffected by this, your everyday life at least. So maybe it doesn't affect any of the characters. Very interestingly, from the author perspective, there's suddenly no stress of needing to wait for your world to be perfected before showing off any parts of it to the public. It doesn't matter if a detail is slightly wrong. You can rectify it later on. Or you can say that it's an in-universe mistake and just roll with it. And this process makes your world that much stronger, often without any explicit planning on your part. So, what does all this look like from a player perspective? Oh, awesome. A new piece from the project I follow. We're getting some new information about one of the historical wars. There's a lot of interesting stuff in here, and this looks like a reputable publisher. Ooh, hang on a second. Now we've got a blog post contradicting part of it. Can we trust that blog? They're a historian, so maybe. Now this blog is getting picked up by mainstream news. It's been cited, so can we trust the newspaper? Ooh, another blog's come out. Looks like this is an ongoing issue. The blog goes further into the history and the decline of this publisher, or at least the supposed decline. Not just from that incorrect date, can we trust the book in itself at all? Ooh, the controversy reaching an apex now. The publishers formally responded in a statement. And now we have a second edition of the book with the fixed dates. But it looks like this isn't properly over as a boycott around this publisher starts to come about. We don't even need the full text. This progression is already a story. The world itself has now become narrative. This tells us a lot about how the society views historical facts, how they value how rigorous those facts are, perhaps how certain groups of people have scientific achievements passed over, who holds power in the distribution of information, who are the ones advocating for others and keeping those distributors in check, how much sway they have in the public sphere, how much the culture responds to losing trust in the institution. All of that we can drill into just from having one date change behind the scenes. Or this could be what you intended from the start. There's no way for the player to know. They're just witnessing an evolving history. We're now going to get into something that's actually a lot more important that people realize, especially in the world building space. It's an issue that I see come up a lot. And you could just spend your time making things that you enjoy. It seems a little bit silly, but I'll get into the specifics of this in a bit. This also ties into point 4 rather than this specifically being an advantage of this method, but it's important enough that I wanted to dedicate some time to it. Now, I invoted Tolkien on that previous slide for a specific reason. I'm not saying that you are not Tolkien in a disparaging sense, as in you're never going to make a world that's ever as good as he did. Instead, let's take a second to think about all those so-called required parts of making a world. At the very least, in the mainstream world-building checklist that you'll see floating around on the internet. Need to make a map of your world? Well, Tolkien did that. You need to make a fully constructed language family that evolves over time? Tolkien did that. Strict classifications of sentient races and creatures, how they interact and live in your world? Tolkien did that. You need to have a full, extensive history of the world from the minute it was created until right now? Tolkien did that. Here's the important thing that I want you to take from this. Tolkien did all of these things because they were things he was genuinely interested in making. He made all of those constructed languages because he had a deep interest in linguistics. He took extensively from Anglo-Saxon folklore and wrote within that tradition because he was a folklorist who could read Old English. What you should be seeing here is not a required checklist for what you want to make, but instead that you should make in-universe artifacts that are things you actually want to make and have a drive to make. That's why people are so invested in what Tolkien made, because he drew on topics he had so much passion for, that passion comes through in the final output, and we then get invested in it. If you're making a bunch of maps just because he did or someone else said you had to, you won't be invested, and we won't be invested. If you're not bothered about this part of your world, why should we? The reason why I'm honing in on this so much is that world building really has this problem. Tolkien is taken as the grandfather of world building, quite rightly, but just because he did something doesn't mean you have to copy him one-to-one. You should be thinking why he's doing this and how you can apply your own whys to your own work. So, point your creative output to things that you enjoy making. Maybe you really enjoy editing audio recordings. Maybe you want to make an in-universe podcast covering a topic. What do you cover? What everyday banter makes it in if you have multiple hosts? You might really enjoy writing fiction, so you write some in-universe short stories. Why did the in-universe author want to write that story? What inspiration were they pulling from? If you're a graphic designer, design a bunch of posters that you see around a city. Who made them and how? What colors do they focus on? Who are they trying to speak to and why? There's so many options here that reducing world building down to just do what Tolkien did just ends up creatively uninspired in most cases, and honestly a little depressing. And honestly, this whole philosophy, I guess, was the main driver for everything that I was doing in Diet of Worms. I was writing out this very long autobiography from the perspective of an anthropologist because I really love writing. And at the time, I'd read some books about anthropologists going out to remote villages and interacting with the magic cultures there. So all of it was just me doing things that I wanted to make, and people really enjoyed it because I'm passionate about what I'm creating. Adding on to that idea I mentioned before of no longer having that anxiety of waiting for your world to be perfect before showing any of it, this process encourages you to make materials over milling about in your wiki all day. Let's demonstrate this. This is a pretty simple idea, but one that has a lot of weight behind it. Everything implies everything, and I mean everything. You could pick one thing in this room and do a thesis level study on how it's a simulacrum of society, this planet, humanity, all of it. Now, when I'm normally doing this talk, I'd be in the room and actually point out things in the room and do a nice little bit about it, but unfortunately, I'm looking at a recording of a screen right now, so I can't do that. Let's move swiftly on. As my example, here's a passage from Diet of Worms. It's a simple paragraph. Now, let's get into everything this one paragraph implies about the world and the person writing it. And there's probably even more I haven't drilled into here. Subtext is pretty powerful. And I mentioned this briefly before, but the format of what we're looking at here implies so much as well. In Universe, this is a digital scan of a book that university students shared around via email. So, books are a common way to share complex topics. Universities exist. Books are used in universities. You can scan a physical book into a digital file. Digital files are seen as more convenient. Libraries might have more limited copies. Email is a thing. Email support file attachments. Everything implies everything. You're free to go off your own personal assumptions and personal views, but if you don't interrogate them at least a little bit, you might be putting things into your story that you didn't necessarily intend. This is, in effect, stress testing your world and putting it into actual motion. You can theory craft in that wiki all you want, but until you actually make things, you aren't sure if they're all going to work together in motion. Not only that, by forcing you to consider how, say, a normal day in a specific village looks like, you're going to be touching on things you might not have considered yet. Would I have thought about the majority of these things in the world if I didn't write Diet of Worms? Some of these, yes, I was explicitly thinking about them when I was writing. Others, no, they just came about as what felt natural as I was writing, or some of my own cultural biases slipped in without me thinking about them. Then when I went back to interrogate them, I either adjusted things around or realized, no, actually, it does make sense for this culture or perhaps this author to be seeing this culture in this manner. This is truly what I mean here by world building through negative space. All of these implications, intentional or not, become the world building rather than reams and reams of wiki pages telling you exactly how things work. This is so much more engaging, so much more elegant, and gives you so much more wiggle room when creating your own worlds. Similarly, in how everything can imply everything, this approach goes against the idea of culture as a monolith. If any of you have heard of the Planet of Hats trope, this gives us a nice way to start working around it. There's often this desire when building a culture or group to say, this is what people believe. This is what everyone in this group thinks. The thing is, culture doesn't really work like that. And it might shock you, but individual people have individual thoughts. This is often most shocking to people when they talk about China. With this public wiki approach, you're pretty much just saying X culture is this because that's how it is. There's not much nuance. Because we're now going from this individual perspective and how that perspective tells of the rest of the world, rather than building these cultures in mass blocks and bulk, we're going to go against that idea from the onset. Let's start with an example point on religion. We can start at this point. Again, this isn't a monolith, just that this culture has these two gods and that people worship them in whatever capacity and to whatever extent. We can then start filling in with some myths or poems or something similar, detailing belief in these two gods. And just for kicks, here's someone being a bit creative with that belief. But I'm bored, let's throw in some conflict with a counter. That's an easy way to go against the mainstream and add some drama. But maybe someone is opening up a friendly debate on this. Maybe they're curious about their own beliefs and are trying to explore them. Perhaps people then start to synthesize and combine these concepts together. and then even further. Maybe we then end up on the other extreme. All of these individuals, or maybe groups, have a different spin on this one myth, and we're starting to detach from that original note. We're evolving and creating something new. That's generally how culture works. It's an ongoing conversation. It's never truly static. It makes it a little bit difficult when trying to represent that, but if we get little fragments of these and these little published materials, we can start mapping out these conversations and these webs. We can do that because we've never made that objective point of the culture only believing in one thing. And instead, we're only saying that these are points of view expressed by particular sources. It could be a powerful source. It could be a majority opinion. But either way, this evolution and dialogue feels a bit more natural. Of course, especially with something like organized religion, we can then say a dominant idea crushes the others for a variety of reasons. But that doesn't suddenly mean that those ideas aren't still around. They're just suppressed. Remember, a prohibition on something means that that something exists. You wouldn't set out a grand set of laws to outlaw behaviors if the peoples weren't doing that behavior. That just wouldn't make sense. To what extent people do it and how much they're punished for it, that's up to you. And also, it's perfectly fine to start off with this church or this very rigid and defined set of beliefs coming from that original note. You just then need to consider who's the one putting out church materials. Is it just one guy? What happens when they die? Is it an elected body? How are they elected? What politics are involved with what they believe, and how do they preach it? Are they explicitly evangelical, or are they quite a closed group? Do people say they follow this religion for a sense of community and belonging, or maybe a fear of prosecution, when in reality, this is what's happening in day-to-day life? That's up to you to play with. And thus, my evangelism comes to an end. I think that more people should world build through negative space. Instead of telling everyone exactly how your world works with objective timelines and objective measures, keep the truth close to your chest. Put out in-universe materials through the eyes of people and institutions within your world. I sincerely believe that you get more interesting worlds from this, and story just naturally comes about if you do. And this concept of something you need to actively engage with to get something out of is a natural home in games. At points during this, I'm sure some of you have gone, hey, this is exactly how a mystery or how a puzzle game is designed. Exactly. Games as a medium, I feel, are predisposed to this method of world building, and it makes me a bit sad that people immediately go to the wiki method to create worlds for their games. Any interactive medium is good for this. LARPs and TTRPGs already play with this idea of a group of GMs knowing everything that ever happens ever and adapting it around how players respond. This is just a more hands-off way of doing that. In conclusion, world building, absolutely is storytelling, and if you don't think it is, please stop going on that subreddit. Thank you.